Welcome back to Thriving in Love podcast. I'm your host, Sana, and today we have a very special guest, Mindi Lyons, also known as the FENYX. Mindi is the embodiment of resilience and badassery with 3 children at her side and a lifetime of battles behind her. Mindi is a living testament to the unstoppable force of the human spirit. Battling through the grips of deep depression and morbid obesity, she emerged stronger, fiercer, and more determined than ever. Overcoming toxic marriages with traumatic endings, Mindi faced adversity head on, refusing to be defined by the struggles of her past. With each setback came an opportunity for growth, a chance to rewrite the narrative and reclaim her power. Mindi, what a powerful story. I am so excited to dive in today. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your story with my audience.
I'm so excited and thank you for the opportunity to share my story with your audience.
So let's get started on when did you start realizing that things weren't really working in your current life? Did you have like a dark night of the soul moment that everything burned down and you had to build back up? Or was it slowly heading in that direction?
I've had many dark nights of the soul, and I've also had many times where the proverbial rug of life has been yanked out from underneath me, and I essentially had to rebuild from scratch numerous times. I'm no stranger to, having to completely rewrite my whole story, my whole life, my life not going the direction that I would have dreamt that it would or that I wished that it would. So I would say the first time that happened was I got married very young. I was raised in an ultra conservative religious environment, and I could not wait to get to get out of my house. I didn't have close relationships and with my family, and I moved out when I was 18. I got pregnant soon after. I had my first daughter when I was 19, and ended up a single parent for the first time overnight unexpectedly when I was 21. So, a lot of people at 21 are just graduating from college, just barely beginning their lives. And I found myself a single parent of a 2-year-old. And so already, my life took a very extreme turn in a direction that I would have never dreamt of or desired for myself, and really had to reestablish myself, moving back in with my parents so that I had someone to watch my daughter while I went back to work. I was a stay-at-home mom at the time when this happened. My husband at the time had been incarcerated, and that's how I ended up a solo parent overnight. And so it was 2.5 years of, kind of rebuilding. And I figured I learned a lot of lessons from that experience. And of course I did. But about 2.5 years later, I got remarried, and that relationship ended up being exponentially worse than the first one. And it lasted a total of about, from the time I got married to the time the divorce went through was about 12 years, but 11 years into the marriage, that also came to an abrupt end when that husband relationship also found himself behind bars unexpectedly. And so it was there was a lot of shame. There was a lot of losing myself in that relationship because it wasn't one of those overtly, abusive relationships where it's obvious. It was a slow fade. It never started out that way. And there's a lot of women or just people in general, who can look at people who are in relationships like I was and say, well, that would never happen to me. I would never put up with that. That's crazy. And I guess there's 2 things I would want to say. For a woman who has been in something like that, there are brilliant, intelligent, very smart women who end up in situations like this, and you would have never dreamed that it would happen to you, could happen to you. And so, cut yourself some slack. There's a lot of things that we have to forgive ourselves for that we just didn't know at the time, and who we were at the time, and the resources we had at the time, the support we had at the time, and all of those things. You make the best decisions that you know how with who you are at the time, and all of those extenuating factors. And, as we move through our lives, we hold ourselves accountable sometimes for things that there's no way that we could have known at the time. So I say that for that woman who has been in a relationship like this, to give herself some kindness and grace and compassion. And I also say that to the people who can be very critical and judgmental, or who would say things like, that could never happen to me. I would never end up like that. That's crazy. I would never allow someone to treat me like that. Because if there's one thing that I have learned It is that you cannot, unless you have been in the exact same shoes, which is actually impossible. It's impossible. Even if your circumstances are almost identical, they are not anywhere close to identical. The characters are different. The environment is different. There's so many differences, even in circumstances that can appear identical. There's just no way you can try and put yourself in someone's shoes. And even if you are living something very similar, you just really can't. You can say all day long what you would do differently or that it wouldn't happen to you. But I've ended up in circumstances where I had said things that would never happen to me or that I would have made a different choice or whatever. And then when you're in the middle of it, you're like, oh my gosh, here I am. Aren't these the consequences of my choices, that you're facing? And then you find yourself maybe doing things differently than you thought you would, or obviously things happening in my life differently than I would have ever expected, and blindsided, and asking yourself, how could this have happened? And looking backwards and having so much shame and attaching a lot of the responsibility that perhaps wasn't even yours to hold, holding yourself accountable for things that you actually aren't meant to hold yourself accountable to. Everybody has an accountability piece, even if you're a victim. But it's so complex. It's so multifaceted. There's no black and white situation to things like this. So I'm here to share my story with a few intentions. The primary intention is because I think more than ever, people are craving human connection. They are feeling alone, ashamed, broken. And it's like, as we start to share the things that we've been through, there's a quote that I love that says, sharing your story can be the key that unlocks someone else's prison. And that's a quote that I very much live by, because that happened to me. I was that person that was so ashamed of the things that I was living in my home life that I, for one thing, didn't think there was a soul on this planet that would be able to understand, the things that I was going through. And there was also the shame factor of, if people did know, how would they treat me? Would they judge me? Would they criticize me? Would I lose whatever social status or whatever, so you have all those fears. And so you keep those things tucked inside, or you've been conditioned to keep those things tucked inside. You've been told not to tell people things. And so it creates this environment of real thick darkness and loneliness. And the more that we can expose those things to the light, the more healing that we can receive for our own selves, and the more that we can bring that healing to other people, and the more companionship that we can offer each other in our individual circumstances, just in the knowing that other people are navigating these same things. And as I also raise awareness to some of the things and the dynamics that have happened in the relationships that I've navigated and just the experiences that I've been through in my life, the more we shine a light on those things also, the more I feel like people will be able to see red flags, and hopefully less women and men, this happens to men a lot too, hopefully less humans will end up in these types of relationships and will be able to find the healing that they need if they have been in one. So that's probably a lot more than you were asking for, but there it is.
That is so beautiful and powerful. There's so many amazing things that you said there. So I hope people really soak it in. The main thing that I want to bring up from the thing that you just shared is, how can we become aware of these red flags when we're in the situations that we're in? And from your lived experience, like, what would be the first step that you recommend for people who may be wondering, I think I may be in this situation and I need to get out? What is that first action point that they can take so that they can start taking going in the direction of getting out of this situation? Because it's not as easy and it's not as black and white. I love what you said about, it's so easy to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and think, why didn't they just do this? Why didn't they just do that? But like, it's so nuanced. It's so much more complicated than that. So from your personal lived experience, what would you recommend for somebody who may, realize that, it's maybe not be physical abuse, but maybe it's emotional, maybe it's mental, maybe it's spiritual abuse? Like, what would you recommend for people for that first step?
That's a great question. And it's also very broad because, just as you mentioned, there's so many different kinds of abuse. There's spiritual, financial, physical, sexual. I mean, there's so many different types of abuse.
Oh, yes.
And there's also levels, right? So not that any level is okay, but there are some toxic relationships that are essentially two people who have let's just say trauma. They have childhood trauma. We've all kind of had our stuff. We have our messiness, and we bring that into a relationship, and there may be things that just aren't a match, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's toxic to the extreme that some relationships are. It might just be like, you know what, this relationship just isn't a good fit, and you break up, you guys both move on with your lives. There's no psychotic tendencies or anything, nobody keying each other's car or anything like that. It's just kind of like, this actually doesn't feel good. This relationship doesn't feel good or right for me. You break up, you move on, and that's a very, what I would consider to be, if I was to pick left and right, that would be on the left side, right? Then there's the absolute extreme where you're dealing in a relationship where you're literally fearing for your life, and there's very strong threats. I've known of women who are in relationships with people who have very strong authority, whether it's political authority, maybe they're, working, maybe they're a police officer. There's people who have very strong authority. They're charismatic. They're well known in the community. And they're very threatened. If you say anything, this is what's going to happen to you, or they're bribed, or they're shamed to say, who would believe you if you come out and you say anything? Who would believe you? Because they're so well liked, they're so well respected. And so there's a lot of different dimensions to these things that it's almost impossible to cover them all. So all I can say is from my own experience, and as a disclaimer, I'm not responsible for what anybody does in their relationship. I'm merely sharing my story and what I found from my own experience. And if someone can take that and find use in it, I'm not telling anybody what to do. It's just what I found from my experience. And what I'll say also as a little bit of a disclaimer is that hindsight is always 20/20. So as much as I can tell you the things that I have picked up on my trail of life experience, you just kind of have to try on for yourself what feels. And when I say what feels, I mean like in your gut. Your gut is so important, and we lose touch with our gut because we're told not to listen to that, and we're told to tune it out. But when I say that, it's like you oftentimes can feel in your body when something just is right. You can sense a red flag, even if you can't put your finger on exactly why or what's happening. You'll get these little intuitive hits. At least I did, where something doesn't feel right.
Yes.
And from a logical perspective, that you can't actually point to anything. You can't say, in fact, the thing that you can point to might actually seem like if you were to tell someone that thing and say, this doesn't feel right, someone else might say, I don't see anything wrong with that. That seems like a totally normal thing. Somebody, like if the husband was brushing the kid's hair or something like that, one person might say that's grooming behavior. And the other person would say, that's a doting dad. What are you talking about? Like, I had a wonderful relationship with my dad. And, when I was a child, he would brush my hair and like do these things. So there are things that are there's so much gray area and can be interpreted very differently depending on those things. But that's why I'm trying to say that the intuition, that gut, like if you were to tell someone the thing and they would say, I see nothing wrong with it. If your gut is telling you something, I really do encourage women to pay attention to what your gut is saying, what those intuitive hits are saying, because I did get a lot of those, but I kept rationalizing in my head as to why those, it's like, no, that doesn't make logical sense. You're overreacting. And that was part of it too, is that I had been in a relationship, in a marriage in my younger years, where I was taught how to recognize certain behaviors. And later on, I realized that the reason why I was taught that was to get my focus and attention off of that person and get my focus onto someone else. So I learned to identify certain behaviors and characteristics. And then when that person ended up, in criminal trouble, then I was like, oh my gosh, now how can I trust myself? How can I trust my judgment? And I was on hyper alert. So then it's like you're viewing everybody who comes into your path through that lens and saying, is this a problem? Is this a problem? Is this a problem? Is this a problem? And then most of those things, if you were to stack them up against what is normal for people, it looks normal. There aren't any major red flags except for I felt weird about certain things. I felt like certain things weren't adding up right, but you can't file a thing off of that. Nobody will listen to you.
Right.
So there was no action that could be taken just based off of a hunch or based off of a gut feeling or anything like that. So I would definitely encourage women or men, I mean, anybody, to really focus on your gut, really focus on, what you're feeling in your body. Are you feeling angst? Are you feeling nervous? Are you feeling, your body knows oftentimes what your mind is trying to talk you out of. So just pay attention to those things. Another thing that I would say, I say this with all the love in my heart, is that one of the primary reasons, as I was reflecting back, because I had to do a lot of reflection to have ended up in 2 marriages that not only ended in very bad conditions, but people who had, some pretty serious things going on, to even though there is no way that I would have ever known that the people that I had married would become the people that I had married. I mean, one was a theology major before I met him. He was an assistant pastor. Another one was a family friend. Our sisters were best friends. So this wasn't just some random person, that I met. I mean, there was no real, you looking back, it's like, okay, how would you ever known? But at the same time, I was able to see some common themes where I was like, how could I have attracted these types of people into my life? And what I will say is that the biggest thing that came to me about all of that was that I was a very compassionate, very sensitive, very naive, trusting. I was someone who was very people pleasing. I was extremely insecure. I had a very low self-esteem. And people like that, I have found, tend to prey. I know it sounds extreme, but they tend to prey, P-R-E-Y, on people like that. So it's very easy for me to see now in retrospect that with who I was presenting myself and just the energy that I was giving out, it's almost like, a lion going out there and seeing this struggling, deer that's already injured. And it's like, you're a prime target, right? So that's the best analogy that I could give. And I'm not trying to shame anybody about that. I certainly understand it because I was that person. But if I was to give someone some advice, please, please do the inner work, do the healing work on yourself. If you have childhood wounds, and most people do, if you have insecurities, if you have a low view of yourself, and we all have issues, everybody has this, but I would just say, implore people, please do that healing work on yourself. Take the time outside of a relationship if you can, because it's just easier that way. But you can still do it if you're in a relationship. But that's the best way that I feel like people can protect themselves from these things, is to do that inner work. Because who I am now, somebody like that would not even want to come near me, because I have so much confidence. I have so much self-awareness. I have so much emotional intelligence. I have so much understanding of my value and who I am as a person. My inner authority is so strong. I don't need other people to give me permission for what I feel. I don't need to filter anything through anybody else or ask anybody else advice about these things. I just know within the core of my being, I can feel it. And even if it wasn't that, my spiritual connection has taken a different form. I like I mentioned, I had a very strong conservative religious environment. And a lot of that I have sort of disassociated with the belief systems that I just didn't feel were the best fit for me. But I have a stronger spiritual connection than ever before. And I get very clear, I call it my spiritual guidance. I get nudges. I get these intuitive hits, about what is right and what's best for me and those different things. So I really filter everything through that lens. So the healing aspect is paramount to protecting yourself from attracting these types of dynamics, because people like that just you're not the injured doe anymore. You're the lion. It's like a role reversal. It's like you're the lion. Right? You have that strength. It's not that you're out there preying on people. It's not that. It's just that you're king of the jungle. It's like you don't have that wounded energy anymore. You understand exactly what I'm saying. I could tell.
I do.
So as far as if you're finding yourself in one of these situations, it sounds so basic. And it's not this easy, but I really would encourage people to get out of these relationships if you're in one. And I know it's complex. My own situation was highly complex. It wasn't one of those where it's like, this just doesn't feel good for me. Let's break up and go our separate ways. There were threats involved. There was which it didn't start out that way. Like I said, this took 11 years of slowly chipping away more at my self-worth, really planting in my head very subtly, but constantly, that I was the problem for so many of the things in our relationship. And, everybody has, I'm sure that I had problems. I'm not saying that I was innocent at all, but we each have a part to play. And because I already had a low self-esteem, and because I was very beat down as a child, you're stupid, you're good for nothing, you'll never amount to anything. And I had all of this conditioning already planted in my head as a child. So I didn't have that emotional intelligence to filter through the things that were being told to me and say, no, that one's on you. It was kind of like I was taking ownership over the things that were put on me. And in retrospect, it's like, I can't even believe that I did that. But again, I had certain situation. I was a certain personality. I had certain resources and certain people who were supportive or not supportive. There were a lot of different factors that I can understand why I made the decisions that I made back then. To get out of a relationship like that, it can be very, very complex. And what I've been finding in my talks with women on these things, there's a lot of complexities, and there will be a lot of women who will say things like they fear they can't make it. Because they have the financial support, they have they have a home, they have certain stability factors. And I feel like I am a great example, because overnight I had to be out of the house. We were homeless for 3 months, bouncing from place to place to place until we could get into somewhere. Major financial destitution. Wow. I was selling plasma to be able to get groceries and Christmas gifts, and my kids were definitely on the angel tree, for church members. Like, Mindi can't afford to get Christmas gifts for her kids, It was extremely humiliating. I lost my closest friends. They didn't understand the situation. I was very heavily criticized, even though I had nothing to do with his own criminal behavior. I was lumped in with it, though. So, it was an extremely heartbreaking season, monumentally more so than I can even put words towards. So all of people's biggest fears that they come at me with, what if people criticize me? What if I lose my position? What if I can't support my family? What if he comes after me? What if, all of those different things? I'm here to say there's an answer for every single one of those. There are so many resources out there, whatever level of the threats. If you're getting threats, most of those are honestly manipulative. They're baseless, truly. Most people won't act on those things. It's just a threat to control you. But even if the person is that level of, I don't want to put terms to it, but my point is that, number one, I truly do believe that if God is for you, who can be against you? So I hold strong to that. And that's one reason why I'm even coming on these things, talking so open and boldly about these things, even though I have my own fears about talking about these things. Of course, I have my fears about who might see this and what are they going to say, or what might be said about me and all those things. But again, if God's for me, then who can be against me? I'm going to share my voice. I'm going to speak my truth. So there's always resources. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It doesn't mean you're going to be put up in a 5-star hotel. There can be major bumps in the road. I certainly had tons of turbulence during that time and many times after. But what I've learned is that in retrospect, you will be absolutely divinely supported. The resources are going to show up for you, whether it's housing, a safe place to live, whether it's the food, whether it's the financial resources, whether it's the medical care, whatever it is. Our states are amazing. They have amazing ways to be able to support. And even if you have to be a little bit creative about finding those resources, some people's phones are monitored and all of their electronics are tapped and their locations are monitored. And I had to get very creative about how I was even trying to find, some help because I was going through some similar things. So out of the relationship is the biggest thing, because whatever you're telling yourself as far as making justifications, that's what a lot of women do. They remember the good times. They think about the good qualities, and they have a really hard time with being alone. That's a big one. A lot of women just don't want to be alone. So even if they get out of an abusive relationship, they quickly get into a new relationship with which oftentimes has the same dynamics because they haven't done that healing work. And so they're just going to, attract different faces, different places,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yes.
building a new house with the same bricks. That's all it is. And so, but once you get out of that relationship, it's so important. The journey beyond that, that's the first step. And that is one of the biggest primary steps. I will say that. Stop making the justifications, stop convincing yourself that it's the best thing for your children for you to stay. I definitely had that in my mind too. I guess I'm just going to have to wait until my kids are 18. This is what I apparently signed up for. I didn't realize it at the time, but how can I possibly leave? All of those things that you're telling yourself, nothing is worth, even for the children, nothing is worth having to witness these things and the things that they're going to pick up in witnessing these things. And there's no judgment. I'm not trying to shame anybody because I have so much compassion for people who go through these things. That's why I'm telling you these things, because you and your children deserve to have a life of freedom, to be able to make your own choices, to be able to feel loved and to feel truly loved, not just told that you're loved, not just love bombed or flattered and then, put down. I mean,
Fake
truly
love.
loved. And many women
Mm-hmm.
don't even understand what that feels like because they didn't have it modeled to them growing up. And, and they haven't had any relationships where they even understand that. And that's another super important reason for taking some space to yourself outside of the context of a relationship, because there are certain things that you just cannot fully understand or even learn about yourself without taking that space out of a relationship to do that inner work, to really connect strongly to yourself, which is one of the biggest things that I did, was take time to learn who I was, to rebuild, like, who even am I anymore? Because you start to slowly lose yourself to the point where you're unrecognizable almost. Yeah. From that point on of getting out of the relationship, it really is about healing, rebuilding yourself. And I mean, my life looks completely different. I am a 180 different from who I was back then.
Can we talk a little bit about the transformation? So like, when
Absolutely.
did you realize that you were actually shifting, your energy was shifting, your vibration was shifting, you were entering into a whole new world? Like, what was that feeling like? When did you really notice that shift?
Yeah. Oh, for me, that's like the most juicy part, because, that's what we all hope for and dream for, right? So, and I'm somebody
Yes.
that lived it. So I know that it can happen. It's possible. It's not only possible, it's probable. But what I will say is that it takes intentional focus. This isn't stuff that just happens on its own. I had to take radical responsibility. And this is very hard for a lot of women, especially women who have been put down a lot, because we tend to get into a victim mentality where we're pushing off responsibility and blame on other people, on our circumstances. And that just wasn't serving me. I was definitely that person for a while, and it wasn't serving me. So I had to shift, and I had to shift to a point where I took radical responsibility, where if my life doesn't look the way that I want it to, nobody can do that but me. I dove deep into personal development. I put intentional focus hours a day, whether I was cleaning or driving or cooking or, any type of, showering, getting ready in the morning, putting my makeup on. I would put podcasts on, and I would listen to, The School of Greatness with Lewis Howes and Maxed Out by Ed Milet. And I would read book after book after book about failing forward and, how to shift your mindset. Joyce Meyer was a huge role in shifting my mindset. I'm not trying to throw a bunch of, Christian stuff on people, but there were certain key people who helped me shift that. Stephen Furtick was one that initially I honestly didn't really jive very well with, but a lot of his sermons were so, I guess they're not even sermons, I would say more like talks. Those were so impactful to me getting through that dark time. There were a lot of things about grace and forgiveness and compassion and kindness. And I had a very different view. I was very self-critical. I was really hard on myself. So as I started to really understand that my mindset, how I chose to view the things that had happened to me, had everything to do with the direction that my life was going to go, then I put hyper focus on my mindset. So I started to see my past not only as, before I saw it all as failures. I was so ashamed of it. And it was like I was trying to move away from my past. I didn't want to be associated with my past, be identified with any of that. But then I started to shift my thinking and go, oh my gosh, that gives me all these different tools that I can now use to relate to other people, that I can now use to encourage and inspire and uplift other people. They're tools in my tool belt. Like, holy heck, how lucky am I that I have all of these different things that I can use? Plus, look at all the benefits that have come from this, not to glorify what happened, but you can absolutely alchemize and transmute the things that have happened to you, pain into purpose, and, all those little cliche things. You get to choose
your mess into your message.
What you do with it, your mess into your message. Absolutely. So that as I started to do that, life just took on a whole different color. It took on meaning. It brought meaning instead of meaningless suffering. And now I was on a mission. I was like, I am going to help as many people as possible to understand that brokenness is beautiful. Brokenness is a blessing. There's a gift in all of this. When you look at the legends that we read about, the people in history books and all of these incredible people who have been world changers and inventors and thought leaders, if you trace back their story, almost without exception, every single one of them has a huge amount of trauma and chaos and heartache in their past. And they chose to do something powerful with it. And that's the thing, is now the perspective that I have when challenges come into my life, because they absolutely do. I am by no means perfect, anywhere close to it, but I just filter it through a different lens. It's like, okay, come on, what do you got? Because I know that whatever is thrown at me now, I'm going to use it as something that is going to be more empowering. I'm going to come out stronger. I'm going to be smarter. It's kind of like you get to a level of invincibility, might seem a little too strong, but it's almost like that, because when you have had everything stripped away multiple times, relationships, finances, cars, friends, I mean, where you truly felt like you had nothing left, that is, to me, a huge position of power, because you get to the point, especially when you can move through that experience and come out on the other side and understand that all of this is going to be used for my benefit. I'm not broken down forever in this situation. I'm actually going to be benefited from all of this, and I'm going to come out like the law of polarity. When you've experienced the extreme, extreme low, you now have access to the extreme, extreme high on the other end. So I'm happy that I've experienced the depths of darkness in my life, because now I have access, I believe, to even higher extremes of joy and bliss and fulfillment. When you can do that, oh my gosh, it's like you are limitless what can happen in your life when you look at it from that lens.
I love that you said that you have a shift in perspective with the way that you handled the challenges now, because I think that's what it is when you go from that victim consciousness to being the creator of your reality, where you start to, instead of spending so long stuck in the depths and the darkness that we have been in, we now have gone through that. So now it's like you have the tools in your toolbox to know exactly where to tap in, what you need in order to get yourself out of it quicker and faster. And it gets to a point, like you said, you shift that perspective where you're like, oh, I know that as soon as I'm out of this challenge, it's going to make me, not only me stronger, but it's going to empower my story. It's going to take my career to the next level. It's going to take my impact to that next level. So I love that you said that. Thank you so much. So I do want to go back a little bit on what you said earlier about trust and trusting your gut, trusting your intuition. What would you say is the key difference between listening to that gut feeling versus, maybe it's fear, or how can we tell the difference between like what is our gut telling us versus what is our fear telling us?
That I love that, because that is so important to distinguish the difference, because there are so many times where there will be something that you may feel called to do, pulled to do, beckoned to do, like there'll be a pull or something going on. And you might even feel like it comes for me in different ways. I mean, I don't live in other people's bodies, so I don't know what they experience. But for me, I can tell the difference between when I'm feeling called or like propelled to do something and there's a fear. For example, what I'm doing now. When it came very clear to me a few months ago that my entire life was preparing for now, that you are now ready, all the refinement has happened, your story is ready to be told. The person who you are now has the capacity to hold whatever comes of me doing this. It's time for you to get out there and share your story. I was so freaking scared because of all of the what ifs. of all of the who's going to be watching, what kind of attacks are going to come because of this. Because I know, I've been around this block a few times. I know that when you're really stepping powerfully into your purpose or into something that can be massively impactful to a lot of people in a positive way, inevitably there's going to be things that happen, knowing
Because of the
that
duality that you were speaking on
it's
before,
the
which is so
duality.
true.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, it's the laws of the universe. It has to be both.
Yes.
In order to expand further this way, you have to experience the darkness on this
Yes.
side. And
You're
that's
getting
just
pulled back. It's like
when you
the
come
arrow
to that
analogy.
acceptance. Yeah.
You're pulled back before you're
Mm,
shot forward. So I've experienced
yes.
that enough times and it does not feel good. And that's one thing, is like, just because something doesn't feel good does not mean it's wrong. Okay. So that's one distinction. In this distinction,
Mm,
I could
yes.
tell the difference because the thing that I was being guided to do or propelled to do or pulled to do, that I could just sense in my spirit was something for me to do, and I had fears about. One of the key ways that I know the difference is because whatever it is that thing is, in this case, it was sharing my story and being very open and transparent about what I've been through in my life. It's for the benefit of other people. You can't point at that and say, something's wrong there. Only from that place of fear or shame or what might people think, or, those types of things. So pointing to the questions, noticing the conversation that's going on in your head about it is one of the key ways that I've distinguished it. Because if it's just a fear of those types of things, what will people think, or who am I, who are you, who do you think you are, imposter syndrome, anything that's trying to minimize you or that's trying to
Mm,
question your value, or make you kind of stay small, keep your voice small, anything like that is, to me, a sure that this is something I need to do, and there's a part of me that's just trying to talk myself out of it. Versus
I love
sometimes
that. Hmm.
we will convince ourselves that there is something for us to do, like maybe there's someone that is showing an interest, maybe you're a single person and someone's showing an interest in you, and like they're hot and they're cute and they make you feel good, and all those things, and you have the warm fuzzies, or you might even feel a little bit of that infatuation, or you have all the tingles, you feel the chemistry and all of these things. That also is not necessarily an indicator that that's the best right thing. So there have been situations where I, as a human, might be feeling like, ooh, this feels fun. This feels exciting. I think I might like this. But there's just something unsettling, from that gut perspective, or there's something that isn't adding up correctly, or I'm noticing myself making justifications, talking myself out of my own. It's kind of like you might have this red flag barometer happening where it's like, you've been through this block again. They might say something and you notice an incongruence or something, and it's like you kind of know, but you're not really. You're trying to talk yourself out of it, or you're trying to talk yourself into something that you actually know is not the best thing for you. So those are times that I note the difference between, it's like, okay, you're just trying to push your own agenda here. This has nothing to do with you actually feeling propelled or called to do something. And then there's times where there's a legit fear, where, here's an example. It might not be the best one, but it's the one that came to my mind. So there was someone in my world
Let's
that was
hear it.
like, oh my gosh, Mindi, I see your vision. I see your passion. I see so much in store for you. And, God spoke clearly to me that I'm meant to be part of, helping further your mission. And, it was very clear to me that I'm meant to be part of that process. And it was just like, from all external things, it would seem like, oh, this is amazing. Someone's excited for me. They see my potential, they see my purpose, they see my mission, they see this vision, and God has told them that they're meant to support me, and like, you could get really caught up in that, right? And there was something that wasn't feeling right about it to me. I couldn't
Mm,
pinpoint it, and I'm not in this person's heart. I'm not inside to know all of the intentions that are behind that, but something just was like, it was just, I could just feel like this, a little bit of like hesitation. It wasn't feeling like excitement to me, like, oh my gosh, someone, wants to support me or whatever. It was like, I do believe that the person was well intended. I felt like they were more than likely sincere and truly believed that that was something that they felt inspired to do. However, I've also learned that just because someone says something or feels inspired to do something, it doesn't actually mean that maybe that's the best thing for them to do or the best thing for you either, even if their intentions are great. So that's why I really do kind of notice that body feeling is there angst, and why? Because if the angst is based off of woundedness, where it's like it's based off of being sort of like, I've had a bad relationship in my past, and so now I'm noticing these things, and so I'm filtering it through that lens, and so there's like bitterness, cynicism, criticism, those types of things. If it's coming from those lower emotions of, woundedness and fear and shame and guilt, anything that stems from that, to me, is a very clear indicator of which side am I operating from? Am I actually operating from my highest self, that is for my highest good, or is my lower self, that wounded part of me, the one that's running the show here? And that's a really good way of me differentiating the two.
I think that's so powerful and amazing the way you said that, because I was just thinking, like, sometimes if somebody wants to help me or if somebody wants to step up for, things like that, I'm like, am I not open to receiving? Is this like a wound that I have where I think I have to be this independent woman who like does everything myself and this and that? But like, I love the way you broke that down, where you were like, well, question it. Don't just like go with your gut and, be like, oh, well, I'm feeling hesitation, so nope, this must not be for me. That reflection, that questioning, the curiosity, like that's where the power is, I believe. When the way you broke that down, it's like, is it coming from your lower emotions, where it's like, it is that like guilt, shame, fear, fear of abandonment, or like, if I rely on them, and am I going to get, caught in codependency and things like that? That maybe is an invitation to look at your own wounds a little deeper and dig into that inner work even more, versus, like you said, if sometimes you do have that intuitive hit and you don't know the other person's intentions, and they may not know their own intentions, and it may be a subconscious egoic thing where they see somebody rising and, reaching limits and, achieving their dreams, and they just want to hop on that bandwagon subconsciously. And they're like, how can I help you? Because I don't believe in my own self, but I do believe in you going there, and I want to go there with you. But sometimes those people can end up feeling heavy, like dead weight, if they don't have pure intentions, a pure purpose, a true, like, tangible way to help, and versus like, oh, I just want to help you, I just want to praise you. It's like, I don't need that. Like, I have enough self-validation now. I have enough empowerment from within, that inner authority that you were speaking about earlier, where it's like, I don't need these posses or people that are just going to like feed my ego. I don't, like, you literally don't need that. You have God empowering you, like taking you to where you need to go, putting you in the rooms that you need to be in, using your beautiful empowered voice to say exactly what somebody needs to hear in the moment that they need it. You don't need other people to be like validating that for you. So that's so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that.
You said so many good things there. I loved how, even as you were describing this thing for yourself, how you were noticing your own hyper independence. That is so key, because even just that little analogy that you gave about yourself, it's like you found your answer so quickly. Because I think if you're able to compartmentalize, it's like whatever this issue is, if you're able to sort of like put it in this little bubble that's outside of yourself and almost like compartmentalize and take yourself away from it and just look at it from an observer view, where you don't have any emotional attachment to it. It's like you're detached from anything specific. You're just truly coming at it from a point of curiosity of what is this and what are these emotions I'm feeling, and look how quickly you detected it. It's like in that specific instance, you were like, oh my gosh, am I coming from this thing of hyper independence and feeling like if I depend on someone, I might be codependent or they might let me down. And then what, so quickly you found the answer. And some of these things happen specifically for that reason. It actually has nothing to do with the other person and whatever the quote unquote situation was, or the thing that they were presenting you. It has everything to do with just shining a light on a part of ourselves that was wounded and wanted, had another layer to clear out of that woundedness. And so that thing came into your experience. Maybe it's a trigger. It triggered you. I love triggers because now I understand what they are. Triggers just
Same.
expose the parts of ourselves that want to be healed. That's all it is. It has nothing to do with the other person or the situation that triggered us. That was the delivery mechanism, whether it was the person that irritated you or insulted you or whatever. That was the delivery mechanism to shine that light on the part of yourself, because the whole ultimate goal here is freedom from all of it.
Yes.
Freedom to just be truly who you are, authentically who you are, to live with the freedom of your own expression and to be fully loved, fully accepted, not because of any external measure, but because through yourself. When you can really own that yourself, you are the most unstoppable person out there. You're more powerful when you're connected to that inner knowing, to that inner authority, to your the spiritual part of you, than millions of people who aren't. And that's why energy is currency. When you can tap into that, that is like a superpower. People, it's happening. It's like the law of gravity. All of that stuff happens. These frequencies, these patterns and energy signatures that we give off, that a lot of people, including myself, always thought is like, oh my gosh, that's really woo-woo, that's crazy. It's like, now that I understand, these are just laws that are happening, and you can partner with it. If you understand how it all works, you can literally create your reality. You take on just a dimension that most humanity, at least up to this point, I think it's shifting for sure, but most humanity doesn't even understand these things. So the fact that you were able to grasp that obviously shows your own level of emotional intelligence and consciousness and all of that. It's beautiful.
I appreciate that so much. Like, hearing somebody else see you the way you think of yourself, you see yourself this way, but then like having that validation is just so like a nice reminder that even if you don't need it, it's sometimes it is nice to have that. And it's like, especially when, like you said, not everybody is here yet. And not everybody has the emotional intelligence, and not everybody has the consciousness and that level of awareness of like where humanity is shifting to. So it's just, I think community is important. So it goes back to that hyper independence that we were talking about, where it's like, yes, there is a moment in time where you do have to detach from every single person around you in order to come home to yourself and remember your own inner authority and your inner power. And there is a moment that shifts also in your journey where connecting with beautiful souls who are on the path, not the same path, but a similar path in their own unique way. It just is so nice to be connecting with beautiful souls like yourself. So thank you so much for being on the show today. I feel so connected to you and your beautiful energy. How can my audience work with you? What do you have going on in your world? And what is your way of helping people right now?
Well, my intention coming on these is not to promote anything. I'm not here to promote my business or anything really. But if you feel inspired to connect with me, I think there's going to be some links where you can connect with me.
Yes.
I'm on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, all the places. I am working on getting my website back up. It's under a renovation right now, but it'll be thefenix.com, FENYX. So I would love to welcome anybody who feels, connection to me, into my world. And hopefully somebody got some benefit from the things that I shared today. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Oh my gosh, I know I did. I am so excited to rewatch this while I'm editing it and you said so many beautiful things, and I'm really excited to dive back into it. So thank you again so much. And I hope you have a great day.
Thank you. You too.